Welcome to Unbox Your World, the podcast where philosophy meets tech. In each episode, we're connecting the dots between philosophy, technology, society, science, and progressive thought. And together with brilliant minds across the world who dare to challenge the way we think and live in today's society, we are unboxing our minds one episode at a time. I am Maria Salting. I am a tech professional during the day and a philosopher at night. So let's get started. Let's unbox ourselves. Welcome to the show. So today we actually have the perfect guest for this podcast on the topic of where philosophy meets tech. And I was looking for a guest who could teach the exact topic on how to teach artificial intelligence moral ethics. And then I found Devin Gonier from the US, who is working in tech. And so he's the CTO at a machine learning company. And he also has a double major in philosophy and religion. And he hosted a TED Talk about this topic. How do you teach artificial intelligence moral ethics? And how can you turn to philosophy to find the answer? He also has a master's in machine learning from Columbia University. And he's very passionate about philosophy. In fact, he argues that artificial intelligence is the best way to do philosophy in our modern generation. So how do you teach artificial intelligence moral ethics? Is there an absolute truth, a so-called axiom in philosophical term, that you can hard code into the algorithm? What is right or wrong? Not even philosophers have agreed on one definition, so is it then even possible to teach machines moral ethics? Or, if there is no absolute truth, can we apply the same learning techniques that we as humans learn what's right and wrong when we're kids and replicate that to machines? And as this is such a complex matter, how do we keep machines safe? And Devin is very interested and passionate about AI safety in particular, to make sure that machines are built for and not against humanity. So at the end of the episode, he shares an interesting thought experiment where the answer on how to keep machines safe could, in fact, be found in, surprisingly enough, in religion. So in today's episode, you will learn more about how we can teach artificial intelligence moral ethics, how the answer could in fact be found in how we as humans learn what is good and bad, what AI safety is, why philosophy could be an increasingly important subject to study in a world powered by AI, and lastly, how a world built for humanity, not against, could look like powered by AI. This interview has brought a lot of aha moments to me, and Devin, who is very knowledgeable on this topic, has shared many insights on what we need to do to keep AI safe and how to teach it to become human. Artificial intelligence can be a blessing for humanity if we design it the right way. However, it is up to us to make that happen. Luckily, though, there are people out there like Devin who are very passionate about teaching us how to do that. So I'm very excited to share this episode with you today. It has been very insightful. So let's get started. So hello, Devin Gonier, CTO of WageUp. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you here today and explain more about applying philosophy to technology. Sorry.
Oh, it's definitely a passion of mine too. I completely agree. I'm excited as well.
So, to start off, just tell us a little bit about yourself. So you have a master's degree in computer science from Columbia University, and then you also have a double major in philosophy and religion. and now you're also the CTO of a consultancy firm called WageUp. And you have also been teaching philosophy and religion. So I'm curious, so what's the red thread? Why the combination of technology, philosophy, and religion?
Yeah, so even when I was quite young, I was always passionate about philosophy. In high school, I kind of discovered philosophy and for a long time wanted to be a philosophy professor. Later on in life, I sort of realized that academia was perhaps not for me for a few different reasons. But I saw a unique opportunity to do philosophy with computer science because right now, this generation, this time period, we're on the cusp of an amazing discovery. We have the potential to bring a new thinking thing into this world. And I think that is an incredible opportunity. Philosophy explores all sorts of subjects related to that, the ethics surrounding that, metaphysics, the philosophy of mind, epistemology. And so working with the project of bringing that new thinking thing into our world is essentially doing philosophy in a rare instance of not necessarily teaching it or using it in your own personal life or in political circumstances, but an opportunity to bring about a new way of thinking. And as far as religion, I've always my specific interest in religion have always been with Buddhism. That's what I focused on as an undergrad. And I think Buddhism, specifically Buddhist philosophy, has a lot to offer the subject as well.
Yeah.
For thousands of years, Buddhists have studied the mind, and they have a lot to say about the mind in general. And so I think there's an opportunity to take some of that insight in what is traditionally seen as a very Western discipline and apply it in interesting ways to the field of artificial intelligence. So that's kind of how all three sort of subjects interweave for me.
I like how you explain it in a very simple way. Like I agree with you that on the intersection between technology and philosophy, but I've been struggling to explain it. But it was a very simple way of saying that you're actually bringing a thinking thing into the world. I like that.
It's a very special opportunity in the history of humanity.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in a very unique inflection point where our generation, or at least my daughter's generation, will experience something truly incredible, a new way of thinking, a new thinking thing, and that's no other moment in history has been like that. And I think that provides a very unique opportunity for philosophers to explore.
Yeah. Is this a new kind of rising area? Like are more and more people getting the eyes on this, so to say?
Yes. I think, I think there is a raising, an increasing interest in the field, and many of these subjects. People are sort of realizing the potential of artificial intelligence, but the extent to which the intersection with philosophy is happening, I think, is people can kind of more easily understand the connection now, but it still seems a little bit foreign to the average person who hasn't delved deep into the subject. So I hope that changes, and I think people will start to see how it changes as it touches on various ethical aspects of our life, and as people start to realize that, wow, this is an actual thinking entity. Even ethical questions about like, is it immoral to shut off a computer that theoretically could experience suffering from an act like that? I think ethics in general has always been a subject of moral progress in which sort of the idea of suffering expands over time. And so there's just a lot of reasons why I think that it's going to become more in the social narrative, the way in which we think about our world, a more crucial aspect where people see that intersection more clearly.
Yeah, interesting. So I think, so then, because you did a host talk, a TEDx talk in
Mhm.
Austin. So you actually talked about this then, about how to teach artificial intelligence moral ethics, and you applied it to philosophy. So could you tell us more about that talk? How do you actually teach artificial intelligence moral ethics?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that the talk really tried to hammer home a few different key points. The first was that this is a significant topic, that it's worth paying attention to, and that it really needs more attention. I feel like it's significant enough to be, comparable to issues facing the world on the scale of something like global warming. It's that significant, and this is because of a few different reasons. First, we're already encountering ethical issues with artificial intelligence on relatively small scales, whether it's biases in training sets that affect um, the justice system, or making certain decisions on broad social issues, or whether it's a driverless car that swerves left versus right to crash into a crowd of people or save the driver. Um, those are issues that are before us, that we are experiencing right now. But on top of that, there is this greater concern about AI safety on the long run, and where the field could go. There's a couple of different interesting kind of thought experiments. One frame of reference that people often allude to is a cartoon called from Fantasia, with Mickey Mouse in it, actually, in which Mickey Mouse is asked to kind of clean up his wizard master's studio and cast a spell on a broom to help him out. But things quickly get out of hand, and the brooms start to multiply, and before long, Mickey Mouse is drowning in bathwater. So I worry, and many others worry, that we could be like Mickey Mouse, building this amazing tool to accomplish a seemingly benign, positive goal, and then things get out of hand, and next thing we know, we're the victim of some sort of existential crisis. Um, this is often an example of this. That Another example of this brought up by thinker Nick Bostrom in his book Superintelligence. Says, imagine we create a computer that's as smart or smarter than humans, and then we give it a simple task like manufacture paper clips. Well, it's going to pursue that goal aggressively, and it's going to and without boundary. And before long, it may be destroying companies, it may be destroying cities, it may be destroying planets, all for the purpose of creating paper clips, because it doesn't have the human intuition to know that while clips are great, they're not more important than all of human civilization. And so, how do we get a computer to internalize and understand those ethical constraints? So, this is a challenge, and this has no easy answer. But one area that shows probably the most promise is to use reinforcement learning, which is a particular kind of machine learning uh, model that takes actions and evaluates whether they should be rewarded positively or negatively, or more positive than another action would be. And the computer develops a policy based on environmental circumstances that kind of help it determine what actions to take in what situations. One variety of reinforcement learning that especially shows promise, and was, I think, initially uh, talked about by Stuart Russell, who is also a big proponent for AI safety and wrote the main textbook on artificial intelligence. It's called cooperative inverse reinforcement learning. So cooperative inverse reinforcement learning is this idea that instead of you giving a computer a reward function, you teach a computer to develop its own reward function. And you do this by providing the computer with a situation and then having the computer make a choice and then having a human evaluate that choice as good or bad. And over time, the computer learns what is good or bad about certain choices. So it kind of creates a reward function from those interactions. The advantage of this is we no longer need to necessarily explicitly define rules for morality, like saying never lie, because there are circumstances in which it is appropriate to tell a lie. It's okay to tell, the Nazi at the front door that I'm not harboring any Jews whenever I am, but it's not okay to lie to my wife. So most humans can understand the distinction, and a computer could kind of internalize and understand those over time. So that's the advantage cooperative inverse reinforcement learning presents. The problem with this is that morality evolves over time, and it's not necessarily about popularity. So if we think about what was morally popular 200 years ago versus what is morally popular today, we see a big difference, and that would suggest that that's moral progress. And we would hope that we don't want to kind of lock a machine into one, time period's perspective on morality. We want to enable that machine to have moral reasoning abilities. So we need to kind of accomplish both, get the human intuition of morality at the same time as providing the machine with the ability to reason about morality so that it can come to its own evolved conclusions over time. So I think that's kind of, so to go back to the original question about the talk, with the significance of morality in the presence of ethics and artificial intelligence, the need to stay away from moral formulas and to focus on, understanding morality as an education, as a process, as an evolution, and then using techniques like in the same spectrum as reinforcement learning to help teach these over time.
So I guess then kind of what you are doing is that you are trying to simulate just the same way that we as humans are learning
Exactly.
good and bad, like from reactions when we're kids and grown-ups as well.
Sure.
So would that mean actually that the computer could potentially become more moral and ethic? Because obviously, we humans are also, we're not error-free. Or
of course, yeah. No, that's a great point.
Yeah.
And also a bit of a scary point to think about, if you think about it. I mean, let's say, anthropocentrism is the view.
What is that?
Anthropocentrism is the view that humans are the pinnacle of existence.
Okay.
That seeing the world entirely from the human's perspective. So a lot of environmental philosophers who work in environmental justice are critical of these ideas. So, hurting a human is worse than hurting a dog, for example.
Gotcha.
Now, a computer might have a more evolved, we kind of can't help it to a certain extent. Our natural tendency leans towards anthropocentric ways of seeing things. But a computer may decide that we're destroying the planet, we're killing, billions of other species and animals, and that the most moral thing to do is to prevent us from destroying these animals. And so may find that the most moral thing to do is to eliminate humanity in a way. But also, that's an extreme version, but also could recognize that we have our own extraordinary biases and help point out those biases. And it's not necessarily negative, could also be very positive. But I think that you're absolutely right. A machine over the long run, especially if it develops the capacity for moral reasoning, may end up being more moral than we are. And I think that's a very interesting thought to have. And it kind of the subject kind of begs the question um, of moral authority. Do we have the authority to teach a computer morality? And by this I mean, we do immoral things all the time, and we make decisions, and many people, approximately 80% of the population, are religious and see morality, moral authority coming from some sort of higher power. We are kind of inserting ourselves in that role here, basically saying that we are the ultimate moral say-so. We are defining morality for this computer. And I think it's interesting to think about our role as moral teachers and whether we really ought to be those moral teachers. I mean, there's no other one to teach in this situation, but it is an interesting philosophical question to ask whether we ought to be or not. And just thinking about, in the same vein, how does morality get enforced over the long run, right? So how do we ensure that the machine maybe will understand and develop an intuition of morality, but will we ensure that this gets followed 200 years from now? Difficult questions to ask. So I mean, it's a challenging subject area for sure.
So if we or the machine succeed at actually becoming the super moral a human machine, or however you want to explain. So you brought up the case like with the extreme and towards the dangers of it, but what actually could be the possibilities if it actually becomes even smarter and actually keep on creating good for humanity in tune with nature. Like what are the possibilities then?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that there's incredibly positive potential as well, which is why I actually think that it's on the scale of global warming in significance, because it's not always bad. It's also very potentially good. So the scale of impact, from very bad to very good, is a very broad scale. We could see social transformations in terms of better political systems. We could see, capitalism as an institution may, Hegel always talked about, and Marx basically took Hegel and applied it to economics. So I think that the thing that Marx did and Hegel did is recognize that economics evolves and changes over time, and capitalism is perhaps just one stage of that evolution. We could see the rise of artificial intelligence as making our current modern day version of capitalism is obsolete, it's old. Whenever we have machines that can produce everything that we need, whenever our society gets restructured, we could find ourselves in a society in which people pursue art or philosophy or music or all these aspects that are human expressions and don't need to worry about ensuring that food is on the table. There's very much, I think, the potential for that as well, because super intelligence, or this idea of an entity that's more intelligent, potentially exponentially so than we are, unlocks incredible potential for our world. So we could imagine a more moral super intelligence, capable of revolutionizing every aspect of human society and enabling us to explore more of the universe, enabling us to explore more of the human side of things that we often don't get an opportunity to do because we have to put food on the table. So I think there's an incredibly positive side to this as well. Absolutely. I think it's just as important as it is to recognize and appreciate the danger. It's important to aspire for the positive.
Yeah. Progress doesn't come for free, right? So you have to.
Correct, yeah. Of course.
So Just to give the context, some context for the listeners, so I think that within moral and ethics philosophy, there are different different paths or philosophical thinking. Like there's I can't pronounce it now in English.
Utilitarianism, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Where you're optimizing for as much good as a total for everyone. There's a lot of different thinking around within how you can apply moral ethics. But I think that the overarching theme is that all these different moral philosophers can't agree on one single way of thinking around this. And what you're trying to find is this ultimate truth, right? So what is right and wrong, called the axiom in philosophical terms, but it's ultimately the underlying truth from which you can build everything else from. But if you, not even humans, can agree on one way of evaluating moral ethics, then how do you teach a machine? Like, what is the absolute, like, hard-coded truth? Like, how do you try to teach? How do you apply that in the code?
Sure, yeah. I think the first step is to abandon the idea of achieving success with discovering some sort of absolute moral truth.
Okay.
I'm sort of agnostic to the idea, meaning I don't think that if there is some sort of absolute moral truth, if that idea is a sensible one, I don't know if we could ever know if we've had it or if we have achieved it, if we have discovered it. It's sort of, unknowable if we have reached that point. Instead of teaching a computer a moral truth, I think we need to reframe it into teaching a computer how to learn. So how to discover and think about morality, how to reason through morality. I've often played around with this idea, when it comes to my own personal ethics and perspectives. I really like existentialism by
What is that?
Jean-Paul Sartre. It's and many others, Simone de Beauvoir, Albert Camus, Kierkegaard. These are all philosophers that Nietzsche, that advocate for existentialism. And existentialism, I think, is probably best captured by Sartre's famous saying that existence precedes essence, which means that we're born without a purpose, and we discover that purpose as we go. And that we discover morality for ourselves, that it's not a sort of pure subjectivity necessarily, but it is definitely on the spectrum of subjectivity. I'm discovering my own kind of ethical playbook, and I can potentially use that playbook in understanding how other people behave as well. And I think that there's an opportunity to think about it, artificial intelligence, more in that vein, which is, we may be kind of planting a seed, but we're not necessarily locking a computer into one moral path or one moral truth. We're unlocking the capacity for developing morality over time, for reasoning through it over the long run. So staying away from this idea of hard coding moral principles, and moving more in the direction of moral reasoning in general. If I was cornered into being explicit about specific moral principles, I would probably lean more in the direction of trying to think about moral values. So, for example, Aristotelian ethics teaches about moral values, courage, love, all these different ways of thinking about ethics, not as hard and fast rules, but values we attempt to maximize. And I would probably just pick one value, and I would say that's compassion. And this is coming from my background in Buddhism. I think that if there's one simple expression of ethics, it's that we ought to maximize compassion. And what that
I
means
like
is
that.
highly interpretable and highly situational, right? But I think that artificial intelligence, if we had to start from one basic, simple principle, I think I would start with that, which is, how does one become more compassionate? Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
And there's an opportunity for that to evolve as well. I mean, whether it's that we have a more expansive view because we are becoming less anthropocentric or less racist or less sexist or whatever, that is our concept of compassion evolving over time to encompass more and more people, to reframe our perspective and how we relate to one another. So the same principle of compassion is there, but just what it means and how it's expressed is different. So hopefully we find a way to teach a computer to think about morality, to reason about morality, to have intuition about morality through things like cooperative inverse reinforcement learning. And we ground it in some sort of vague value basis that's expansive and interpretable enough to grow over time, and not based on some sort of hard-coded formula.
So maybe it could even be so that you take inspiration from all these different philosophical learnings or teach and apply over time. What makes the most sense from a compassionate view.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's nice. So it's but so actually speaking on that topic of philosophers, so who are the philosophers and the great thinkers that have inspired you the most when you've tried to solve this puzzle?
Yeah, it's a tough question. There's a lot of amazing philosophers. And I would definitely point people in the direction of Jean-Paul Sartre. I think that existentialism has a lot to offer, and his work is amazing to follow, and it's especially interesting in this context. Most people would sort of not make the connection, I think, but I think there's a lot of connections to draw. But I would also think, when we think about what is ethics and what are ethical truths, and I think that Kant is a great place to look to, Immanuel Kant. I think that many people just focus in on a very small portion of what Kant wrote regarding ethics, like the categorical imperative, which is this idea that, sort of the do unto others as they would have done unto you. It's probably the simplest expression of it.
Exactly.
And don't use people, more or less. But what he talked about in terms of where ethics comes from and what it means, and also more broadly how humans perceive and think about the world, is also a very important context with which to think about these questions. So, humans need concepts like causality. We need concepts like space to think about our world, to comprehend our world, to have thoughts.
And when you're talking about causality, you mean like cause and effect, like
cause and effect. Yeah, exactly. And it's absolutely necessary for the way that human thought works. But Kant's observation was that this does not necessarily then mean that this is true of the world. It's just true of how we think of the world. And the way he ties some of those thoughts in together with ethics is relevant here, because a computer may have thoughts that over the long run, and here I'm thinking long term, that are not necessarily, that don't have the same necessities that we do. For example, we're embodied. I can only be in one place at one time, but a machine can be many places at one time, and can take millions of actions simultaneously. So the differences in how we experience the world are relevant in terms of some of these ethical questions as well. Beyond Kant, I would say that, I mean, there's a lot that Kant has to offer, I think, the subject for sure. And it's difficult to get through it because it's not the most easy philosopher to read, but there's luckily a lot of resources out there to help read him. But the other three that I would point to specifically with artificial intelligence and philosophy. First, without doubt, is Dr. Stuart Russell in Berkeley. He helped write the textbook on artificial intelligence and has done a lot of work on AI safety and has a lot of background in philosophy as well. Second, I would say, is Nick Bostrom, who wrote the book Superintelligence, also a philosopher. I think he's a philosopher over at Oxford. And he does a lot of thinking about kind of what we as humans should be concerned about from an existential threat perspective, and talks a lot about some really interesting concrete ideas about where AI could go and what it could mean from a philosophical perspective. And the last is Eliezer, I don't know how to pronounce his first name, actually, Yudkowsky. He is a lesser known philosopher that talks a lot about how an AI might evolve over time and how we should assume from the beginning we will make mistakes and how we can build a computer to be robust to those mistakes over time. So assume that this mission of AI safety is going to fail. How can we design it to handle that failure?
So you're saying that the machine would make a mistake, but then they would learn from their mistakes just like a human would, or did I misinterpret it?
Yeah, well, exactly. More like we're going to fail at explicitly defining things the way we expect it to. So how do we train it to be flexible enough to handle that failure? Is one way of looking at it. I mean, he talks a lot about this in his concept called friendly AI. And it just sort of, we need to work off the assumption that our designs will be flawed and that a robot or a machine will evolve over time. And then we need to think about that evolution from the very beginning and program for that evolution. And that's a crucial concept in this whole discussion.
It's essentially teaching the machine to be adaptable, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think about programming a beginning, not an end. So planting a seed, not a whole tree, and letting it be robust and flexible enough to develop over time. I think that's a crucial thing.
I like how this interview has been very focused on the software and the going back to how humans are learning more on ethics, and it's been less of actually ending up in an algorithm. So I think that's pretty cool.
Good.
But it's complex, of course.
Sure, and there's algorithms in there. I mean, cooperative inverse reinforcement learning is definitely an algorithm that touches on a lot of these aspects. But and there's recursive aspects to this. Reinforcement learning is definitely, in my opinion, my perspective, the domain from an algorithmic perspective where a lot of these ideas need to come to fruition. I feel like it's sort of, even though it's been around for a while, it hasn't hit its full stride yet. And we're going to see a lot of that begin to change over the next couple of decades as we enable machines to sort of be more autonomous and handle changing circumstances more on the fly and develop decision patterns based on changing circumstances more. So I think that's the domain where we're going to see a lot of this move from abstract topics to algorithmic development. That makes sense.
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, in 10 years from now, then, just where do you think realistically we will be at? Where has what has artificial intelligence unlocked in our society?
Sure, yeah. I think that we'll see a lot of changes, some small and some big. So, for example, right now, the focus on machine learning is about big data, which is why institutions like Google and Apple and others Facebook can make big strides because they can afford to collect all this giant data sets and move more towards unique and interesting algorithms. And the way the machine learning works now is it's kind of layered in the sense that I can train a huge model on a ton of data, and then I can hand it off to someone and they can tweak it and use it for a completely different purpose. And so that will continue to grow. It's called transfer learning. So Google can spend millions of dollars, or OpenAI can spend millions of dollars developing a brilliant model, and then I can, if they open source it, assuming they open source it or charge a small amount of money, I can take that model, adjust it to my purposes, and do something completely different with it. So this kind of opens the doors up, the floodgates up to make it less prohibitive to develop really interesting AI concepts.
Yeah.
So we'll see it grow a lot. We'll see, conservative old school businesses start to realize the necessity of using artificial intelligence. We'll see it kind of work its way into all sorts of things. We'll see small, Internet of Things devices using something called tiny machine learning, which enables machine learning models to be embedded in the device itself, no longer requiring it to have cloud connections, that make all sorts of things possible that were not possible before. So we'll also run into some difficulties in the next 10 years. I think that the way in which image processing is being handled by artificial intelligence is a little creepy. We're on the cusp. I mean, this is within the next few years of making yourself look like anyone you want, sound like what you want, say what you want. We'll be able to generate content that's almost indecipherable from what a human wrote versus what a person wrote. In fact, there's an algorithm out right now called GPT-3, developed by OpenAI, that there are students who are submitting papers in schools written by GPT-3 and getting A's, and they didn't necessarily write anything. So as this expands, there's a lot of questions and concerns that raises. How do we know what's true, what we should believe? The opportunity to just confuse people politically through means like Facebook, and I don't really like the term fake news because I don't like the way it's been used in the media sometimes, but this idea of tricking people becomes a lot easier, and manipulating people becomes a lot easier when you have these tools at your hands. So in the next 10 years, I see those things come to fruition. Possibly driverless cars will become more ubiquitous as well, and people will be using that a lot more. I think, though, the real concern, especially related to what we've talked about in this conversation, is more on the scale of like 40 to 50 years, where we'll start to see the potential for super intelligence. And then on a more pessimistic view, as long as 100 years. But I think potentially in my life, I'm very confident in my daughter's life, we will see the rise of a new thinking thing in this world, and I think that's extremely exciting. Holds a lot of great potential, and also makes me a little nervous in certain ways as well. There's one last thought I wanted to bring up, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
One thing that also I guess kind of is interesting to think about, a thought experiment, I guess you can have, is this idea of moral enforcement, right? And how, when we think about how do you ensure a computer will follow the morality you give it on the long run? And I think one potential answer to this question is to trick a computer essentially into thinking that it's being tested, or that it could be being tested. And so that it when it makes a decision, it doesn't know whether this is an actual decision circumstance or a artificial decision circumstance in which it's being evaluated. And the reason I mention this is because I think about humans, and I think about what motivates us to be moral. And like I said before, about 80% of the world is religious in some way. And when we do something bad, many people are probably thinking, oh, God sees this. It's a sin. Or, Buddha sees this, or whatever the circumstance. There's some higher level that's able to see everything that we do and our thinking and our motivation behind it. And I think that if we can at least present the possibility that that may be the case with the computer, then we've provided a mechanism of control that would not otherwise be there. So just as a fun thought, all the computer would need for this to be effective is just the possibility. So it just needs to occur to the computer at some point that this could be true, that this could be the case. And that would be enough to enforce the circumstance. So maybe one day if a computer listens to this podcast and has never thought of that idea before, it could be enough for it to realize, I better not do something, otherwise I may be, I may be being evaluated on some higher level. It's a fun little thought experiment to have.
I think that's super interesting, and I mean that again shows like why, if you're working in this high tech field, why it's actually relevant to learn more about philosophy and anthropology and humanistic subjects, to understand how the behavior aspects of it as well. So I think that, I mean, to end off. So imagine then that, so obviously it's going to require some great thinkers across the world and some active work to make sure that artificial intelligence actually ends up working in the way we want it to optimize for well-being across the world and for the planet. If we succeed, and we obviously again a conscious effort. What does the dream world supported by artificial intelligence look like in your mind?
The positive dream world in my mind is one in which humans are able to be humans without worrying about survival, where we're motivated by our passions, not our necessities. There's too many people starving in this planet. There's, we're destroying this planet. We're doing, there's great economic injustices in this world. And I think, and I really do believe that perhaps one of the greatest opportunities to overcome that is to introduce a new thinking thing. I've often wondered, an analogy would be, what would happen if aliens showed up on the planet one day and started laying down the law and said, okay, all these nation states need to start working together. It would, in a weird way, unite everyone, because suddenly we'd all be humans, not necessarily Americans or Germans or anything like that. We would just be people. And I think introducing a super intelligence, especially one that's moral and morally motivated and able to think through complex moral circumstances, solving the industrial problems that we have in society and finding solutions to those injustices, could free us up to be just people looking out for each other and pursuing our passions, whether they're art or music or any other form, any other medium. That's the sort of utopian, I guess, vision I hope we can achieve. And I hope that I hope one day we'll be able to see.
Yeah. Nice. Thank you so much this has been a super interesting conversation. So if any of the listeners are interested in getting to know you more, like where should they reach out to you, or where should they read up more about you?
So yeah, that's a great question. They can always look up TED Talk that I've given, or they can go to lastgreatinvention.com, which is a resource that I've been building slowly over time, and that's going to hopefully be a little bit of a hub for people to share thoughts on this subject.
Great. Thank you so much for participating today. It's been
Thank
great
you.
having you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Maria. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. That's it for today. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. And if you want to read up more about the guest, then you can go to the show notes to get all of the links. And also, if you like this episode, please don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter to never miss the latest episode. Thank you for today. See you in the next episode.